Welcome back to Tennis Unfiltered with me, James Gray of iNews.co.uk and the iNewspaper. I have, as always, got the two guys who you're desperate to see, and now you can see their faces and their eye rolls, as I know many of you have been enjoying over the last week. We've got Calvin Betton, our resident tennis coach, and George Bellshaw, who is, of course, our tennis broadcaster, fence sitter, and various other professions that he claims to occupy. We're all in our, well, I was going to say we're all in our respective homes this week. I am away on holiday, but I have taken a break from watching my nephew and niece jump into the pool to come and talk to George and Calvin. George, out of interest, is someone cooking in the background of your house by any chance?
I think they're changing the cat litter tray.
That would be a really good radio show. Like, what noise is this? And no one would ever get changing the cat litter tray.
Yeah.
How many cats do you have?
Mute if that. It's not actually my cat. I'm staying with a pal who has a cat, lovely cat called Peggy.
Right. Okay. Very good.
Very good friends with.
Calvin, how many human or non-human flatmates have you got these days?
No, I don't have any at all.
Calvin.
But I love how last week, for the listeners, after last week's episode, James sent a checklist round of production values, seeing as we're on video now every week. And 5 seconds into the next episode, George has got someone taking out cat litter, which is just phenomenal behaviour.
I mean, it's Steve Simon level of effective leadership, isn't it? It's
yeah, it's very in terms of production values so far, we're more GB News than
Sky News.
Than Sky News, I suppose. Yeah, without the horrific right-wing policies.
On both counts. But we will try and talk about some tennis this week. We've loved having so many of you listening and watching this over the past 7 days. But we are going to talk, of course, about Dan Evans. We'll talk about Coco Gauff because they've both won titles, in fact, in the last 24 hours. Dominic Thiem made a final in Kitzbühel as well. Stefanos Tsitsipas picked up another title, and we head back to Canada this week for the Masters tournaments. Nick Kyrgios has also been active on Twitter, and Martina Navratilova has been picking a fight with the USTA over their trans policy. This is, of course, as always, Tennis Unfiltered.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Let's get straight into it because I actually watched, at least until the first rain delay, Dan Evans against Talon Griekspor in the Washington final. Dan picking up the title. We obviously all know Dan Evans in various different ways. Calvin, you've known him for much longer than the rest of us, but I think even you, even if you'd had the most one-eyed view ever of Evo's season, you would have struggled to predict that he was going to win this title, given, I think, as you pointed out, he's won one singles match since April.
Yeah. Look, no way would anyone have predicted he was going to win this tournament, but it's also, as we were discussing last night in our WhatsApp group, it was at that level of the game, it tends to happen. That tends to happen. A player ranked somewhere between 70 and 25 will win. A random player will win a 500 or a 250 at some stage in the season, and form tends to go nowhere that indicates that might happen, but it just does happen. And the reason it happens is because they're bloody good players, and it only takes one of those players who are, and bear in mind that they are the very top players in the world. Those guys who are ranked inside the top 50, let's say the top 40. Those guys who are ranked in the top 40 are obviously the top 40 at what they do in the world. So as long if they raise their game 5% up from what it's been, and everybody else is a little bit off it, or even if they're not a little bit off it, those guys will win matches. There's so little in it at that level that and Evo did this week. Evo played 5% better than he's played for the whole season, I'd say, so far, maybe bar Barcelona. And it was good enough because he beat everybody, and he had good wins. This wasn't one of those tournaments where you think, yeah, well, who did he beat? You know, he beat. I mean, Talon's a good player. Talon's going to be a top 15 in the world player, I think. He's an excellent ball striker. Evo showed up some holes in his game, which he tends to be able to do with certain types of opponent. TFO was there. TFO's a home tournament as well, and I wondered a little bit. I'll come back to Evo in a minute, but I watched a couple of TFO's matches, and I don't know why he seemed to be doing this, because he's always great fun, his TFO. He seemed to be, because it was his home tournament, he seemed to be really trying to make an effort that he was serious and he wasn't going to smile and he was going to be really, really focused. And it just didn't work for him this week, I don't think. It just didn't work. But yeah, beat him, and then who did he beat before that? I've gone blank.
Well, I beat Shevchenko.
I beat Dimitrov.
Yeah, and obviously beat Dimitrov in the semi-final, yeah.
Yeah, and Shevchenko's a good player as well. Shevchenko's having a good year.
Yeah.
So yeah, really good. But the strange thing is, and this is not a prediction from me one way or another, the strange thing is, at that level of the game, I don't think it gives any indication about what's to come next. It could just, everything can just revert to type. We see it all the time. So he's not got a particularly easy draw in Toronto, I don't think.
He has got
10 minutes ago.
Diallo, the Canadian,
he lost to
in the
Diallo.
first round.
He lost to Diallo at Surbiton this year.
Right. Okay.
So and that's a Canadian in Canada as well. So so yeah,
George,
I'm happy for him. Really happy for him. Really happy for Beach, who's working with him at the minute.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about Colin Beecham, who was in his box this week with Kieran Vorster, who was a fitness trainer who worked with him over the summer. Now, for people who don't know, Dan split with his long-term coach Sebastian Prieto just before the grass court season. He worked with Matt Reed, who's an Australian, I think, former doubles player now, and he has now officially retired, hasn't he? But he had been James Duckworth's coach, and James Duckworth was injured. He's now gone back to work with Duckworth, so Evo needed someone for the hardcourt swing, and I guess Beach presumably isn't working with Harriet Dart anymore at the moment, and Carl Edmund is still kind of trying to fight his way back from injury, so he's not kind of restricted there. Calvin, you've obviously known Beach one way or another, I guess, a long time as well, and I wonder if you could just give an idea of what type of guy he is. And look, you can't give him all the credit for Evo winning a tournament, because Evo was out there hitting the tennis balls, but I wonder what sort of influence he might have brought to that box that has maybe just changed the dynamic.
I mean, Beach is a great guy. He's the best connected person in tennis. Like, if you need something in tennis, or you need to get hold of somebody, Beach will always know. I remember last year when Henry, because everybody who knows Henry, who I coach, he's a big lad. He's 6'6", and I think he's a size 12 or 13 shoe maybe. And there was a shortage of grass shoes last season, and we tried everything. Like, the company who sponsored Henry, he's sponsored by Dunlop, and they have a shoe deal with K-Swiss. They couldn't find any size 13 grass shoes. We tried everybody. We even went to the lengths of, because I know that Fila in the States, they sponsor both John Isner and Riley Opelka. So I figured they've got to have some big-footed grass shoes, like somewhere. But that came up blank, and then about a week before the grass season, I was just chatting with Beach, and I said, just Henry's got no grass shoes. It's come the grass court season. They rung me back about an hour because I found some. There's a shop in Wimbledon, and they're keeping a pair for him. So he's the best connected man in tennis. Loves his coffee. Loves calling it drop shot coffee in Southfields every single day. Absolutely loves the All England Club. He's there all the time, and he's just a great guy. And I think that it's one of the things. He obviously brings a lot more, but the one thing that he will have brought to Evo's camp in the last couple of weeks is, and I know this because Evo told me himself, he just wasn't enjoying playing tennis. Wasn't enjoying. I think what surprised me was he didn't seem to be enjoying competing, and I've never seen him in that state. But he just wasn't enjoying it, and I think he'd love to have Beach on board full time, but I don't think that's possible just because Beach has a bond and a relationship with Kyle, and he's stuck with him this long through the recovery, and he would want to see it through that. So that's not going to happen. So they're good friends, and he's just doing the hard court season with him. And then I think the hope then is that Kyle's back to full fitness.
I can relate to not being able to find any size 12 shoes, Calvin. I was having an absolute nightmare earlier. I identified about 12 different pairs of... I was literally just looking for some white bloody trainers. Found 12 different pairs, none of which had 12s. And it wasn't even just that they couldn't get 12s. They had like 12.5, 13s and some... Just no 12s. It's a horrible size. I once had to buy a pair of very garish red football boots because they was literally the only pair they had in the shop, and I gave them that afternoon.
I'm a big fan of buying garishly coloured foot. I mean, I don't have particularly large feet, but I'm a big fan because they're quite often cheaper. Like, genuinely, you go in and get like a horrible colour of football boots, they are quite often like 15 quid cheaper.
I think I might have told this story on the pod a couple of years ago, but I used to play Sunday League football in Barnsley where it gets a bit rough. And there was one morning where I just couldn't find my football boots. I just couldn't find them anywhere. So I had to call at, I think it was Sports Direct, on the way to the match, and the only boots they had in were these chrome-coloured Nike Vapors, I think they were called. And I remember I wasn't over the moon about it, but I didn't have any option. I had to get them. And then I went out onto the pitch and I played centre forward or winger, and there was a huge hulking centre half at the kick-off before a ball had been kicked, and he just looked down at my feet and said, "You better be good wearing those." It came off with a few bruises. No. So I came off with a few bruises that day, I think. I don't think I ever wore them again.
You've kind of already answered to bring us desperately back to tennis somehow. You've kind of already answered my question, Calvin. But, Evo always talks about how the kind of core of his season, he regards the clay as a bit of a bonus, although he has worked hard on it over the years. The core of his season is the grass court and the US hard court. I mean, I look at his game and I don't necessarily see that there is a connect there, and I don't see why he would play that well on the US hard court. But I guess it is the sort of faster conditions, and he's a very good server these days, isn't he? He's someone who hits his spots better than maybe he ever has.
He's got a great serve for his size. There's no question of that. In terms of, he's probably got the best serve of any player under 6 foot, I'd say. But I think one of the reasons he does well is because it's strange. There's strange conditions in the US in the summer at these tournaments, in that the balls tend to fly through the air quick because it's hot, and the courts are very slow. So
weird.
It's always going to suit the more skillful player because there's differences in rhythm and that kind of thing. And Evo's just such a talented lad that he's going to get points because of that he handles that better than anything else. And you saw it last night. He drove Griekspoor crazy with that short slice that he uses that we spoke about a few times before. And Griekspoor he must have given him 20 backhand errors in the match just through Evo chipping away, short angled backhand, and Griekspoor just couldn't do anything with it. And he's just a bit inexperienced.
It is bizarre. I mean, George, we've talked a lot before about how funny he is to watch as a player, but I wonder if I can tempt you into a prediction for let's say the US Open, since incredibly we're only like 3 weeks away from the US Open already. But if you had to put your heart somewhere, or your head, I should say, on, I think he's now world number 21, new career high for Dan Evans, fresh off his second career title, incredibly, at 33. If you had to predict his US Open progress this year, what would your range of options be?
I mean, I do kind of feel like with Dan that often his best results are then followed up by a very poor slam result at the tour level, and often the other way around, that sometimes he arrives in slams in quite poor form and then surprises us. I know that wasn't the case at Wimbledon. I think in terms of a range, he still can lose first round. I mean, if he gets the wrong match, he can definitely go out quite easily. I probably realistically, I don't really see Dan going past the fourth round of a slam. I don't think he's done that today. Has he? Has he been to a quarter? I don't think so.
No, he hasn't.
I feel so. I'd still be a little bit surprised. I think he can hold his own against most players, but by the time you get to the fourth round with his ranking, you're quite likely to be playing someone who's, you'd favour to beat Dan 9 times out of 10, probably more, 19 out of 20 at a Grand Slam. So, yeah, I would probably say fourth round would be a very good result, but yeah, not much better than that, I wouldn't have thought.
I think the other thing to look at is the likelihood of his draw, because I say, he is up to a career high 21 now, but he is already going to drop 6 places in the live rankings because he's going to Canada, where he made the semi-finals last year and has to defend a whole load of points. And I think, as Calvin mentioned, he's got Diallo in the first round, which isn't a great draw, and then he's either got Dumanor or Norrie, and then probably Taylor Fritz, which overall I think, I know we always say Dan can beat anyone, but it's not ideal, to say the least.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be a real challenge for him to try and defend those points and stay in that kind of higher level of seeding, because obviously the way the seeding distribution works and the way you get seeded and the way your draw then works, because of that, he will desperately want to be above kind of, what's the cut of it? 24 is the next level, and if he can stay above that, then yeah, that would be great. But if he can't, then that's going to be a real problem. Well, let's move on from Dan Evans to another one who won a title in Washington this week, and that was Coco Gauff, who, contrary to Calvin's forthright opinions on her coaching change, has gone from strength to strength since picking up a new coach. She beat Baptiste, she beat Belinda Bencic, she beat Ludmila Samsonova, and then Maria Sakkari to claim the title without dropping a set. So she's fixed, George.
Has anyone slid into your DMs about that, Calvin, or been dropping you any comments? You went incredibly strong last week.
I don't think anyone's ever slid into my DMs about anything, which probably says something about me as a person. But I saw somebody had commented on Twitter. Look, I'm not reading anything into that. She's a decent player. She's a decent player, and what we're going to say that she'll do as well at the US Open as Dan Evans will, because he won the men's one. It's
indeed.
Did she beat anybody who you think she'd have to beat to win a slam?
As in a final?
Well, even in a quarters or semis, look at the. If you're saying the best player she's beaten are Belinda Bencic and Maria Sakkari, then I'm not reading a great deal into that. The last player to beat Belinda Bencic and Maria Sakkari in a slam was Emma Raducanu, and how's her career gone?
Indeed. Good to get a cheap shot in there as well. Well played, Calvin.
But
yes,
it's
you are
not
right.
A cheap shot, but I'm saying it doesn't really mean a great deal. It's a 500. It's like, and she is a good. She's got a great serve. She's got tennis brain. I'm talking. I'm not talking about somebody who I think can win 500s here. I'm talking about the expectation that we should have of Coco Gauff is that she could be winning. The expectation was that she would be winning multiple slams, not a WTA 500. It's multiple slams and competing at the latter stages of them. If she gets the US Open and she's competitive in the latter stages, then I'll hold my hands up and say I didn't see that coming, but fair play to the guy and fair play to her. But I don't think there's anything to read into this at all yet.
Do we feel it's more likely to be a turning point for her than for Dan there? As in, could this be something that she's just been missing to ignite her? Could it be a confidence thing or not so much?
To simply answer your question, yes, because Dan Evans is 33 and Coco Gauff is, I think, still 19, somewhat improbably, right? She's still not she's still a teenager, which is just completely absurd. So, how many more turning points does Dan Evans have in his career, really.
Yeah,
with the greatest respect.
A very immediate turning point, I suppose, for this calendar year.
turning point in her season, maybe. I think it probably is more likely to be a turning point because she's probably someone who needed that a bit more. Like, I think, as you kind of alluded to, George, Evo isn't much of a confidence player. Like, even though he is someone who obviously plays well when he's confident, as everyone does, he's not someone who needs that. And as shown by his results, he can go from playing brilliantly one week to playing awfully the next. He's very capable of that, and vice versa. And maybe the type of player that he is also allows that. Whereas, like, Gauff is someone, I think, who needs to have really kind of strong, I don't know, like a strong, like, body of work behind her in order to really feel that she's going to do something in a Grand Slam. So yeah, I think it's massive for her to do this. Not that far out from the US Open. It doesn't really matter now what she does in Canada because she'll kind of look at it as, well, I've got my proper form in, and yes, I'd like to pick up a couple of wins in Canada, but then we chill out and we move to New York, and that'll be the thing that really matters, I think, personally. Yes, it won't do her ranking any harm, and it'll make sure she gets a half-decent draw, which I think is a really big deal for someone like her, who I do think needs to play her way into tournaments. But, I think an incredibly useful result for Coco Gauff.
Calvin, we're having a bit of a technological nightmare this evening, aren't we? We've had to say goodbye to James and leave me to do some ad hoc presenting, which, as listeners will know, can be quite grating on their ears, such as how good James is at it and how subpar I am. But we shall power on. And for those of you watching on YouTube, you'll probably have just seen us weirdly jump from 3 to 2. James is sat here in a producer role in the background. So, hello, James. I hope you enjoy this and it's not too painful for you. So we think Coco Gauff's going to have more of a turning point than Dan Evans here. One person who there's no sign of a turning point for at the moment, but has weighed in, is a Mr. Nicholas Kyrgios, Calvin, who replied to a friend of the pod, as James would say, Miles David, on Twitter. So this is what Miles wrote. He said, Dan Evans will receive $353,000 for winning the ATP 500 event in Washington, D.C. Coco Gauff will receive $120,000 for winning the WTA 500 event in Washington, D.C. They played at the same venue all week. They played best of 3 sets all week. They will not get paid the same. Nick Kyrgios is clearly unhappy with this framing from our good friend Miles, and has replied, what about slams? Do we do this breakdown then? Vondrousova made more than Novak that week. Now, let's not forget that a Grand Slam is a fortnight, is the first kind of issue with that in terms of accuracy there. Calvin, what do you think he's jibing at there? What's got him upset on this occasion beyond his usual idiocy, as you might put it?
I mean, first of all, I don't agree with what Miles said anyway. I've got a lot of time for Miles. I find him really compelling conversation on tennis on the occasions when I've spoke to him. But I don't agree with the point he's making there, and I'll come to that in a minute. Obviously, there's an argument against what Miles said, and it wasn't made by Nick Kyrgios, who, as I said on last week's pod, is just a stupid man. He just isn't very intelligent, and like the obvious reason why Vondrousova made more money than Novak Djokovic is because she won the tournament and Novak Djokovic didn't. So that's the obvious argument back there. But it's again come back to this idea that Djokovic has, that tennis players shouldn't be prize money shouldn't be awarded for how far you get in the tournament and who wins it. It should be awarded to who is more popular, which is the biggest load of tonk I've ever heard. In that one, how exactly do you quantify that? He keeps talking about how he sells out stadiums wherever he goes. He sells out stadiums, right? One, how do you know it's you and not the other person who's playing? And two, these tickets are sold months in advance. Then what's one of the problems with tennis? When everybody asks me all the time when they say they're going to go to Wimbledon, they always ask me like, "Oh, what day will Djokovic be playing?" and things like that. Well, you don't know. You don't know who's on the court, so he doesn't sell out stadiums. I'm sure, Listen, he's an entertaining player when he plays, and I'm sure his television numbers go up when he's playing one of the big players. I know, my dad, for example, likes to watch tennis. If you tell him that Kyrgios is playing Andy Murray, or Kyrgios is playing Djokovic, he'll tune in that night. If you tell him that Kyrgios is playing Talon Griekspoor, he won't be bothered about watching that. It's just, it's just an interesting one because he can be flashy and he can cause some problems because he's got a great serve. People want to tune in when he plays Djokovic, but he's nowhere near as popular as he thinks he is in the stratosphere of just outside of fanatical tennis fans. He's nowhere near as popular as he thinks he is. I can say that, but anyway, it's a stupid point you made. It has no logic to it, and that as most things that come out of Nick Kyrgios's mouth are. But I'll touch on it briefly on Miles's point initially that, again, we covered it a little bit last week, that the reason why the female players at Washington this week were not paid as much as the male players is because they're two different tournaments. It's not the same tournament. They're run by two different people, two different organisations. Those organisations decide on the money. The WTA will decide how much they're paying for the female players because it's their tournament. That's what they're running. The ATP will decide how much money they're awarding for their players because it's their tournament. They're running it. It's not one against the other. No one has decided. No one has the decision to make. Oh, we're only going to give the women less money than the males here. That's not how it works. They're two separate organisations, and you can talk about equality and that type of thing. And as I said last week, I think if ever they're the same tournament, when it's Wimbledon or any of the slams or US Open in a couple of weeks, then they should get paid the same amount of money. But you can't say, well, it's not like for example, in other equality arguments that we've had where, say, when we were talking about the BBC presenters and there was a huge discrepancy in how much the male presenters were getting compared to the female presenters. In that they're doing the same job. It's the exact same job that they're doing and they're not getting paid as much, which is not on at all in this day and age, or in any day and age, to be honest. The ATP or the male players would argue that females are not doing the same job because they're playing against different competition. And they may say that the competition in the women's game isn't good enough at the minute. It's not comparative to the men's tournament. It doesn't pull in. This is why they want if we had a joint governing body and it would never happen, as I said last week, because the male player, the ATP, won't agree to it because they're taking money. They will be taking money out of their own pocket. And the argument they would give is that, well, they don't pull in the amount of money that we do. That's why they're not getting as much money. They don't pull in the marketing, and that's why the WTA won't be able to pay as much this week because the marketing, the sponsorship deals, the TV deals that they've made aren't up to the standard that the men's are. So they don't have the money to offer, and you can't just where is this extra money coming from? That's what I'd like to ask Miles if I spoke to him. I'd ask him, where is this extra money coming from?
I think there's probably a broader point lodged up in here, and I think we covered a lot of the ground of the kind of the men versus women thing last week. But actually, on tennis's popularity, I was quite struck by a tweet from Juan Ignacio this week on Twitter at @JuanIgnacio_AC, who kind of detailed the number of followers on Instagram of all the big tennis tournament accounts, which I know is no perfect measure for anything, but I did think it was quite interesting that, so you've got Wimbledon at 4.7 million, the rest of the slams are kicking around 2.5 million, with the French Open slightly ahead on 2.8. So there's we've spoken about kind of brand Wimbledon and how big that is as a selling point. That seems to kind of, certainly on social media, be outstripping the other slams. The next highest tournament is 220,000 followers in Miami. I mean, that's quite a substantial kind of drop off. And then, you know, big events like Paris, 99,000. You know, tennis really is quite niche, isn't it, in terms of those numbers? I mean,
100%, yeah. And I think a lot of people involved in tennis don't really understand that, because they get quite fanatical about it and quite defensive about it. But it's not a big sport most of the time. It's the Wimbledon. It's always big because it's on terrestrial television in Britain. And terrestrial television, although the world's moved on to streaming and that kind of thing, terrestrial television in Britain still holds quite a bit of sway. I don't know how big the other slams are in their own countries, whether they're still on terrestrial television or anything. I'm not sure the US Open is. I think it's on ESPN. France has got a little bit of Amazon, I think. But, yeah, it's not huge. But, again, George, what I'd ask about that, I'm trying to look for that list that you sent, but I can't find it at the minute. But how many of the women?
If you name a tournament, I can give you the numbers. I've got it in front of me. So,
well, I just wondered how
you're
many
going to ask me
of
WTA versus ATP finals.
Well, yeah. What's the highest ranking WTA final that wasn't at a tournament where they had male players as well?
So, WTA finals is 35,000, which is quite low. The ATP finals is 125,000. Now, you might say that's probably a more established tournament. There's not really broken down by women only, but Monte Carlo, which is male only, that's 133,000.
Yeah, but that's
bigger than the ATP finals.
You can say, and it's legitimate to say it's a longer established tournament, etc., etc. But I'm not trying to argue for ATP or WTA. I'm trying to explain why those things happen, and why, whatever the reason is, there is more coverage, or more people watching, or more people following ATP than there is WTA. And if we go by the basis of like followers equals money, that explains why the ATP pay more.
I think that the other thing that really stood out to me about this list is, I know these aren't just kind of women's tournaments, but actually the Chinese tournaments are really quite low down. So you've got Shanghai, 19,000, Beijing, 18,000, and Wuhan, which is WTA, we're talking kind of 2,865. And I think this probably points to a broader economic challenge that the WTA has had. They've gone and chased big money contracts in places where globally, outside, obviously China's a massive market, but globally these aren't necessarily the most kind of attractive tournaments to kind of a wider audience, I suppose. And
they're also, I think,
in those baskets.
In terms of, tennis is a huge sport in Europe. When you take it to China and that kind of thing, it's not great in terms of viewing times when you can watch it and that kind of thing. If you want to watch it live, it tends to be late in the middle of the night and that kind of thing. So that's another problem. It's the same as when you have tournaments out in. I mean, my two of the lads who I coach are playing in Stanford next week, which is California, and that will mean that I'll be up watching tennis matches at 4 a.m. in the morning, and it's not ideal when you get those time frames. New York's not so bad. New York's actually ideal. Like the US Open's an ideal time. It comes on at 4 o'clock, and it runs for the rest of the night, so people can just watch it when they get in from work, that kind of thing. But I'll come back to it though, George. That again. Just because we kind of discussed this last week and got panned for it in a couple of reviews, that I think somebody called me a chauvinist or something, which is not the case. I would love the female players to get the same as the men, but you can't make the maths work. You can't square that circle of right. There's two tournaments. They're at the same venue. There's two different tournaments. The WTA has this amount of money to give. The ATP has twice as much money to give. They're not connected at all, these two organisations. If you think that the female players should be paid the same as the men's, you've got two options. You've got to the WTA has to find some more money from somewhere, otherwise there is none, or you join the two organisations and the men give some of their money to the women, which no one's ever going to agree to on that. They will never agree to it. Or the third option is like, what do we want? What about if would it be fine if Dan Evans only won £150,000 yesterday? Because that's another thing I wanted to raise, right? £150,000 for a week's work in a tournament that's a third tier tournament is not bad, is it? So it's like you could even argue that, like, Coco Gauff had a decent week yesterday. We're saying, gee, she made 150 grand yesterday. We're going, but she didn't get as much as Dan Evans did, who won a completely different tournament. Like, it's the same as when this is the thing. What annoys me when Djokovic starts arguing about how he should be getting more money and winning the latter stages of tournaments. What, you don't think 3 million quid's enough for 2 weeks' work?
I think you're touching on my kind of position on it. Really, is that you could do a big kind of economic shift in tennis where the top of the game is still paid very handsomely, as you're kind of alluding to there, and you could support a lower network, and you could equalise it across quite easily by going down to that sort of thing. But you need kind of strong leadership, and probably, really, as you say, the players are never going to accept it, which
you can't, and as well, George, you can't force people to enjoy women's tennis. That's another thing. Some people do. I enjoy watching some women's tennis, but you can't force people. I know a couple, like, again, I'll use a couple of my mates, right? They would text me because they watched Evans play Dimitrov and TFO, and then they were texting me last night about it. I can't tell them, no, you've got to watch one about Coco Gauff. You haven't got anything to say about Coco Gauff against Belinda Bencic or Coco Gauff against Maria Sakkari. You can't make people interested in it if they're not. And that's something the WTA has to take care of. Because there was a time when people were interested. Absolutely there was a time around about the early 2000s, pre-Federer, pre-Nadal, where women's tennis was definitely more interesting than men's. And I think they made a lot of money in that period.
I think as well, not to overly defend the women's game, but it's lost a couple of, three massive stars who were also top players. You lost Serena, but then you've lost Barty, who was world number one and a big name who people were starting to get used to, and she's just quit. Naomi Osaka was a massive name.
Yeah,
she's just gone out of it. That's hard for any sport to lose players of that kind of significance.
100%, and like you say, Serena there, and so Serena's a megastar, and Naomi Osaka's a superstar. They're two big, huge losses. I mean, when they played in the US Open, and there's the drama that followed from it since, everyone was watching that.
Yeah,
people wanted to watch when Osaka first came through. People wanted to watch that match, and that's because you had superstars. But the problem again is the organisation. It's not been run great, the WTA, and also I don't think the players have helped themselves either, because no one really has any form of elite level consistency.
Yeah.
Swiatek's getting there, but even she doesn't still quite have it.
And not to labour the point, but the last men's generation of tennis wouldn't have been so good if Federer had quit at
100%,
24,
100%.
and Nadal had quit at 23.
Totally.
And you've had Dimitrov and Thiem and whatever sharing Grand Slam finals for 10 years. That wouldn't.
I do think if the people who are arguing about equality and equal pay in tournaments, there is equal pay in tournaments where the tournaments that are the same tournament. There's none that don't anymore. But that's not the argument to have. The argument you've got to have is the WTA, are WTA players getting paid enough for winning tournaments? And you don't compare it with the men's. There's no point in that. It's like comparing. Tell me one sport where they do get paid the same as the men's.
Well, there's not, are there? I mean,
No.
This is again, tennis is miles ahead.
Miles ahead of anything else. I think is golf catching up to it, or is women's golf's quite popular, isn't it? Or no, probably not.
I wouldn't have thought it's exactly the same as kind of how Wimbledon pays.
I don't think it's the right. I think it's the wrong direction to go in, because it's not equality then if you're just going, the men's tour should give us some money. That's not equality, is it, really? What they should be doing is making their product better. And it can get better. Can get a lot better, but just saying we should get paid as much as the men. I'm sorry, it's just not. It doesn't carry any logic, that, for me.
On more light-hearted and positive feedback you've had this week, Calvin, some of our listeners have assigned Pokemon to you, which I know you were very pleased with. I'll read a couple out, because they did give us a good laugh this week. So if you don't remember last week, Nick Kyrgios had a Pokemon tattoo, load of Pokemon over his back, and we were talking about which Pokemon we would be. We were struggling a bit due to our fairly poor Pokemon knowledge. James got named by @TennisRanter as Blastoise, who's a giant kind of turtle. And there were descriptions of why we've got all these names. Absolute tank that blasts dangerous options at ease. I like that. Calvin was something called Mega Gross, who, some of the listeners have been calling him this week for different reasons. Very knowledgeable and hard-hitting with his opinions. And I'm apparently Meowth, which is a cat. And I'm apparently a bit goofy. News to me. There is me thinking I'm like James Bond. No, I'm a goofy cat. But can have some razor-sharp views. Well, that's slightly better. And then we had another one who called you... who James got downgraded from Blastoise to a Squirtle, which is a tiny tortoise. James clearly giving off tortoise or turtle energy for some reason, which I'm sure he's delighted with. You got Lugia, who looks like quite a cool flying Pokemon, Calvin. I think you've definitely got the highest kind of average ranking of Pokemon here. And then I've become Lapras, which is quite a cool water mythical creature. So thanks to those. That was Hanya on Twitter who gave us those ones. So you happy with your Pokemon, Calvin? Are you going to get a Pokemon tattoo?
No, I won't be getting a tattoo, but yeah. Yeah, happy with my outcome there. Seems positive, I suppose.
It's positive.
I don't really know what Pokemon is. Is it a game or a cartoon or what?
So I think it started off as a card game, I think, and then it became a cartoon, and there was a quite big feature film a while ago.
Okay.
They chased Pokemon called Mew.
Right.
It was a little cat.
Fascinating.
There you go. Anyway, we're not Pokemon Unfiltered. We are Tennis Unfiltered. So I will pull us back towards that, and let's go for a bit more kind of positive news. We were talking about stars in the women's game. One player who does have a big social media following and was a big star who retired relatively early in the grand scheme of things, Caroline Wozniacki, is back this week, Calvin. She's going to be starting off against a qualifier in Montreal. What are your thoughts on her coming back? Is that good news for the women's game? Is she a big recognisable name that will potentially quell some of those complaints you've just had? And how easy is it going to be for her to kind of step back in and challenge at the top of the game now?
I've got to be honest, I'm a bit underwhelmed by it. I was never a massive Wozniacki fan. I never thought she was all that great, to be honest. She was, she's a good player, don't get me wrong. But when she was at the top of the women's game, I always found that a bit strange because I just never really rated her. She makes a lot of balls, competes well, but I just don't think she was ever as good as... she was never anywhere near as good as Swiatek is now. Those type of girls. I don't think she's anywhere near as good as... Rybakina, Sabalenka, yeah. So, and the way that she played, she was always a bit of a battler who made a lot of balls. I'd be surprised if she gets anywhere near the top of the game again, to be honest.
She's claiming she's coming in to win the US Open. I believe she can do it.
She will not win the US Open.
It's going to be a Wozniacki Gauff final based on your prediction.
Well, that'd be quite something, wouldn't it? But she will not be winning the US Open. If she's around in the second week of the US Open, I would be gobsmacked. And I'll tell you something else, right? That if she does come back and gets to the latter stage of the US Open, then that kind of proves the point of what we're just talking about. How can you be taking 3 years? How long has she been out? 2 or 3 years out of the game?
Maybe even slightly longer. I mean, what was her Australian Open final win. That was like 2018, right? 2019.
Yeah, but out of the game as somebody who was nowhere near one. It's a bit different when Kim Clijsters came back and did it, because she was the very best in the game when she retired. Wozniacki wasn't when she won one slam. And she wasn't, like I say, I never really rated her. So if somebody who was like, okay, quite good a few years back, comes back and does better than she really ever did, apart from on one occasion before, you'd think, well, not great for the women's game, is it? It'll bring a lot of attention. She's a big name. Bring a lot of, they bring a lot of coverage, and that's one of the things that I'm supposed to be saying. James has messaged in there saying Nadal and Federer both spent 9 months out. They were both out injured, though. That's different. That's different from just deciding they're not playing anymore. Like, and also, as I've just raised there, they're two. You could argue they're the two best players of all time. They're certainly two of the best 3 or 4 players of all time who are coming back and doing it. They're injured. You don't. They've never switched off from the game mentally, and coming back to do that. I mean, and also, like, I'd be berating James if he was actually on the screen here for comparing Nadal and Federer with Caroline Wozniacki. I mean, please.
Speaking of someone, he's come on the screen to be berated. One player who you might say is more comparable, although I think you might tell me I'm being a bit harsh here, and you know how much I do love this guy, Dominic Thiem, in terms of slam wins. He's reached a final this week in Kitzbühel, but lost to Sebastian Baez. We also had Stefanos Tsitsipas beating Alex de Minaur in Los Cabos. But I wanted to throw some listener questions at you, Calvin, because I think we've got some pretty good ones this week. Here's one from Matt on email. These are what James sifts through every week. He loves reading them and sends them to us, and we all get our thinking caps on. But Calvin has not been cited on this yet, so you're getting a raw reply from him. If Calvin could put himself in the shoes of Gilles Savara post-Wimbledon, what would he be working with to help Daniil Medvedev overcome the major problems he has facing the world number one, of course meaning Carlos Alcaraz? The gap between the two this year looks huge, and it's not just the return position Medvedev has issues with. His serve is getting worked over as well.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I've got to admit, if you're getting paid by Daniil Medvedev, you'd want to convince him to have some belief and try and do something. But outside looking in, you're thinking, I don't really see what you can do there. He's got to have. I mean, the obvious answer is he's got to be playing more aggressive. He's got to have a bit more. He's got to be better at finishing mid-court balls. That's one of the things that Medvedev isn't great at. He's not accurate. He doesn't have enough racket head speed on mid-court balls, apart from put-away ones.
Is that a confidence thing? As in, does he have the ability to
I think
go
it's
for
a technical
it more?
thing. No, I think it's a technical thing as well. Technical and a physical thing. I don't think he's not the greatest ball striker in the world. He's not the greatest ball striker. He's not got the fastest racket head when he's finishing balls. So that's a problem, and like I forget the guy's name who asked the question. What's he called?
Matt.
Matt, and like Matt says, his serve is getting worked over a bit because it's just not very accurate. He throws the ball up, and he's got a big serve. It's a hard serve, but it's just like he's not great at hitting spots, is he? He's just like he goes somewhere near where he's aiming at, and it just doesn't. Yeah, it's just not accurate enough. And the pace that he's got he's got quite a big serve, but quite a big serve that isn't accurate. It's not really what you want. I think he's going to, I'll be honest, I think if he's going to win more slams, somebody else is going to have to take care of Carlos Alcaraz. I don't think Medvedev will ever beat him in a slam.
And, I mean, we don't want to be too much of a pile on Medvedev here. I mean, Alcaraz as a whole, it is quite hard to look at him and think, God, that's a serious weakness. We can really get him behind. I mean, he's so bloody quick. He hits well off both wings. He's got a great drop shot. He's moving well. If you're trying to find something, one glimmer of hope, what is it? What's the thing you say when you're playing him? Is it not giving him angles, trying to kind of bore him down the middle? Is it what can you do against this
I think you've got to take the game to him. I think that's you've got to. You can't start letting him set. Once he starts teeing off and standing there and teeing off, he's got you in a whole world of trouble. But you've got to. He's a great defender as well. But it's the only way that you're going to beat him is by doing that. And you look at the guys who do give him trouble. It's guys like Holger Rune. I know he hasn't beaten it. Oh, he has beaten him, hasn't he? But you know, for a couple of sets at Wimbledon, that was tight, and that's because he can hit through him. But
Sinner,
yeah, absolutely, Sinner. That's the most obvious example. Those guys are not standing there and going, right, I'm going to trade with you from the back of the court, because when you do that, then Alcaraz will start slowly taking over the rally. He'll start getting you on the run, and then he can finish mid-court balls. Look at the if you were to list, right, when I say a mid-court ball, I'm not talking a short one. So say a ball lands without much pace somewhere between the baseline and the service line. Central with your opponent slightly off centre. You're in attacking position. If you were to list, who's the best in the world at finishing that ball? Who would you say, George?
finishing a
mid-court ball.
Best in the world.
Well, I'd say Sinner's up there.
Sinner.
Alcaraz is up there.
Tsitsipas isn't actually that bad at tee.
Tsitsipas pretty good at it. Forehand's good, yeah. Rune's very good at it. How many players do you think you'd list before you listed Daniil Medvedev?
Probably a lot.
Yeah, I think you'd probably get. I'd even reckon you might get 50 before you get that. Because there's guys outside, there's some guys who I see, like Quinton Halys is brilliant at that.
Yeah.
Like, you look at, like, he cleans up anything when he gets inside the court. And Medvedev's he's just not. And that amazes me. He's just one-dimensional like that. You got to hit. If you can hit through Medvedev, you've got him in a world of trouble.
Would you? I'm trying to find any positives for Medvedev here. Would you say Murray was that good at finishing off kind of short balls?
No, he never has been.
Would
He's
Murray struggle against Alcaraz if they were playing now at their pomps and their peaks? Would Murray struggle to beat someone as good as Alcaraz?
The only difference between Murray and Medvedev is Murray can do it a little bit better on his backhand. He's still got a great backhand from there. So if he's actually better on mid-court backhands than he is forehands. Is Murray. But then again, I've always thought with Murray though that it's an issue of him being overly safe and just not letting the racket go. I mean, you can't. When I say Medvedev's not a great ball striker. If we're honest, Murray is a great ball striker. I've been on court and seen Murray strike the ball, and he's a beautiful ball striker. If you always get the feeling with Murray, it's still that he's always had that little bit of safety in everything he does. And I'm a bit gutted. I was gutted the other day that he didn't beat Fritz, because that was one match where I thought he really went for it. Wasn't 100%. It's not like he threw caution to the wind like I'd like to see him do sometimes, but he went after the ball, and I think it was just a little bit of luck that held him back. And one of those games which I'm sure it infuriates him, but I'm sure it infuriates his team, and it infuriates me, where he played great the whole match, and he started with an absolute dog shit game in the first game of the match, and then couldn't break back. And then, did he break back? Yeah, sorry, he did break back, didn't he? He got that set. But then he did it again at the start of the second. He gave a game away, and he gave a game away in the third that wasn't through Fritz playing brilliant at all. Just gave a game away. And he played 3 games. One of them didn't matter because he won the first set. But he played this great brand of tennis that I think, when I watched him play that, I thought, right, he could compete at the back. He could be in the second week of a slam here and giving somebody trouble, because he's now hitting the ball a bit more. He's trying to do a bit more. He's focused. He's zoned in. But he's got to not stop throwing in those service games where he just does like backhand error, drop shot in the net, double fault. That's basically what there was too much of.
I mean, if he was to play Taylor Fritz at the Slam rather than on the rest of the tour at the minute, you'd probably back Murray because Fritz's form outside the Slams is infinitely better than him.
Well, yeah, true.
Speaking of Murray, I actually wanted to move to talk to him about doubles, which he was signed up with Dan Evans this week in the City Open. They lost to Argentine pair Maltini and Gonzalez after beating Pavic and Krajcek, which was not a bad win at all in the first round. We've had a good question this week as well from Laurie over email. So I think you'll be pretty well placed to answer again, Calvin. So this is Laurie. I noticed Dan Evans and Andy Murray are playing doubles together this week in Washington. A while back, you spoke about Dan Evans's and Andy Murray's volleying in respect to how it fits into their respective doubles games. Could you perhaps expand on how exactly Murray is a more technical volleyer compared to Evans, and how this would help/hurt him when playing doubles?
I might have worded that wrong. I wouldn't say he's a more technical volleyer than Evans. Evans has got a lovely technical volley, but also has a bit of more dexterity in his hands, I think I would say, which is what you need in doubles. And I watched that doubles match, actually. I watched they had a good win and then they lost in the next round. But and there was a couple of instances specifically about what I'm talking about there that you've just got to have. Because I guess he's more of a singles volleyer, where he comes in and he gets that you're just going to go into the open court. And that's what happens, because you know where your opponent is. Whereas in doubles, the angles change and that kind of thing. So you need to be able to hold your choice and hold your racket, hold the ball on the racket to the very last minute, and then change your wrist and that kind of thing, and play some shots with your wrist that you wouldn't ever play in singles. I'll try and explain one that I'm talking about that I don't know if I can do it without any sort of visuals. But if you have
our YouTube watchers can see it, Calvin,
yeah, but I don't have a diagram prepared, do I? If you're standing, if your service partner and your partner's serving from the deuce side, and the ball comes to your backhand volley, okay. So, and you want to go inside out, so you want to go back down the other side, you want to go out wide of the tram lines. That's a volley that technically you would never ever play in singles, because you'd never be in that position to play that there. You'd never have to play that there. So, and similarly, if you got a backhand volley from the deuce side, if you're the server and the ball comes into you, you'd never play a backhand volley from the kind of the deuce service box. So it's just a case of having the thing. What Evo has is he just has more dexterity in his hands than Murray does on a doubles court with his volleys. Murray's technically a very, very sound volleyer. You wouldn't pick up it, and it's something that I think it's mainly come just through Evo's played a lot more doubles. You just end up doing a lot more of that, and also in practice, Evo tends to. There's a lot more games and that kind of thing where you start it. Murray in practice is very drill orientated, which 100% would lead to that kind of situation where I'm talking about his volleys. He's technically very sound. He doesn't have great dexterity. He does have great feel. He doesn't have great dexterity. If he chose to play, I think you'd find if Murray chose to play doubles most weeks in the season so far, you'd notice an improvement in that in his game by about 60-70% by the end of the year.
You've sort of stumbled into a question I was actually going to ask you there, Calvin, in a way. I was going to say, if you were playing a doubles match next week and you could pick one of Dan Evans or Andy Murray to play with you, which one would you take right now?
I mean, you wouldn't be in a bad position. If I could choose one of them, I'd be quite happy with that position. That's tough to say, I think. I think it would depend on what kind of player you wanted them to play with as well. Because
what about you?
Well, no, because I'm shit. So it wouldn't make any difference.
If it makes you feel better, the other one gets to play with me at the other end.
No, I mean, look, it comes in terms of like actually meshing as players. Because if say, I mean, without a doubt, Murray's the better returner. There's no question. I mean, Murray's one of the best returners of all time. So that's no slight on Evo. So if you were a player whose return wasn't great, you need somebody to win a lot of points on return. So, you'd go for Murray in that respect. If you were a server who was an okay server but isn't great, there's two ways of looking at that. Because if I'm a player who's got a decent serve but not a great serve, then I want two things. I want a really good service partner who's going to cover the court and take care of anything that's, borderline grey area, and I want somebody who's going to hold serve themselves. In that respect, I'd probably take Evo, because he's a better service partner for the reason that I've just expressed. That you're gonna have to play some tricky, some strange shaped volleys and that kind of thing. But it's tough to say. It depends what, like I say, it depends what kind of player you are.
If you're asking me the same question, I would say Andy Murray, because then I could say I've played doubles with Andy Murray. That would be
well, you're a celebrity chaser, so.
That is what they famously call me.
Yeah. But I don't know. I mean, I guess it's like this. If I was going to play, if the two players who I coach, if you go right, Henry needs a partner 1 week, Julian's out injured or whatever. Henry needs a partner. Who are you choosing? I'd probably choose Murray, because
he's always wanted to play with Andy Murray.
Not necessarily, no, but I think it's probably one of those where you'd think he can just, like, Henry's got a huge serve. He's going to hold serve most of the time anyway. He's got good hands himself in that regard, so I think that would be a good match. But if you're saying to, like Luke, who's a great returner already himself, and sometimes his serve. He's got a good serve. It's not as good as Henry's serve, because Henry's got a great serve. But in that circumstance, I think maybe Evo's a better bet here, because Evo's got a good serve himself and he's a good service partner.
Seems fair enough to me. Fair enough.
I'll tell you one other thing as well on that. Evo's got a better second serve than Murray as well, and he'll hit spots on his second serve more. Whereas Murray's second serve, he's going to kick it into the body a lot. I'd be worried about that if I was. That's my only concern. If you needed Murray to win match, if you're playing doubles with Murray, because doubles players, you've got to hit spots on second serves. Because the doubles players, the actual doubles specialists, will take care of body serves a lot better than singles players do.
Why do you think that is?
There's an argument that, look, singles players, they don't get to experience so many body serves, second serves, because to win points at singles, you've got to go spots on serves. So they're just they practice returning spots better. Murray, as we know, Murray's second serve's never been a great second serve, and he'd probably have won a lot more slams if he did have a better second serve. It's kind of quite slow, and it goes into the body.
Yeah, I'd eat it alive if I was at the other end.
I'm sure
of the
you would,
court,
yeah.
Obviously. I've got one kind of final topic on my set list this week, Calvin, which I'm kind of reluctant to end on, because I don't really want to talk about this. We have covered this conversation before, but it has made some headlines this week. Martina Navratilova is back in the news, criticising the US Tennis Association for their kind of policy towards transgender athletes. Now, what's basically sparked this off as a 55-year-old, or playing in the plus 55-year-old women's tournaments in the US national championships, Alicia Rowley, who's a trans athlete, has reportedly won the women's national championships, and that has upset Navratilova, who said it's not right and it's not fair, and that the sport is not for failed male athletes. I mean, as I say, I don't really want to go through this again, but I suppose there's quite an interesting difference in policy here that Navratilova has brought up compared to the kind of professional and the amateur game. So just to quickly read this to you, the USTA states this transgender inclusion policy that trans athletes should be included and not blocked from playing sport. The document states it is necessary to ensure, insofar as possible, that transgender athletes are not excluded from the opportunity to participate in sporting competitions. The overriding sporting objective is and remains the guarantee of fair competition. Restrictions on participation are appropriate to the extent that they are necessary and proportionate to the achievement of this objective. Now, I guess there's probably a bit of a practical point to this, isn't it? That actually insisting people are kind of proving they're a certain gender at kind of tournaments that aren't professional, etc., feels like quite a long thing to do, and quite difficult. But it's just very depressing that Martina Navratilova is so fixated on this issue, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think as we've said before on the pod, it's such a difficult topic because you've just got to have such nuance on it, and I can strongly see both sides of the discussion on it, and I feel for trans athletes and trans people who are in that situation. I also feel for women athletes who feel that they're getting the rough end of the stick on here. I'm surprised that Navratilova is so vocal about it, because this is somebody who has experienced a whole lot of discrimination in her career, in her life. And I think that she could do well to remember what her life was like around the late 70s in towards all of the 1980s, and the kind of situation that she faced in that time, for her physique and also about her sexuality. And like I say, she would do well to just have a bit more memory on that, I think. Beyond that, I don't have an answer for it. I don't think there is any answer. It's just a real tricky one. I think that, as far as I'm told, with the American policy, it's not great, and there is a feeling that some males are trying to take advantage of it. But how would we ever find that out? How can you ever? Where do you go for that? How are we ever going to know if that's what people are doing? But I think the thing is, though, that outside of America, for all the talk of it, I think the other countries do have basically a better system in place. Like the idea that, it was bounced around here whenever the Tories need some sort of distraction from the mess that they're creating in the country, they tend to ramp up the trans debate again, and we get to hear, well, you could just have a female player going, a male player going and playing women's golf or something like that, and it's like, no, you couldn't. That's absolutely not what could happen in Britain. Like, there are rules in place that stop that kind of thing. But yeah, it's such a difficult one. I don't want to. I don't think I really have. I don't know enough about it, and I don't really have the intellect to be able to argue that one as well as it should be covered for everyone concerned, I don't think.
I must say, I've not seen many 55 plus tennis tournaments covered on this podcast or in the more mainstream media before, which I think probably goes a little bit to the point of there are certain things that are just being thrashed around in the national media for different kind of games, shall we say. James has helpfully just sent me a useful text of some context, because normally he would be much better at handling these kind of hosting of subjects. So he said, for reference, in the UK, players can attend sessions in the gender as they present, but once you hit competitive ITF level, then there is a maximum testosterone levels for male to female players.
But that's a difficult one to go with as well, isn't it? Because you then get into the situation with Caster Semenya, who basically had her career robbed off her because someone deemed that her testosterone levels were too high. And that, I always found that absolutely bizarre, being that it's athletics, which is basically a test of genetic athleticism, really. And because she was a freak athlete in what her body was a freak in what she could do, but was it any more of a freak than Usain Bolt? Usain Bolt had this situation where he bizarrely has long limbs, long levers, and fast twitch muscles, which almost never happens. So, and that's why he turned out to be the best sprinter of all time, because this strange combination of long levers and fast twitch muscles. So, are we going to go to Usain Bolt now and go, no, your body's not, your body's just too freakish Like, you're too good. Your body's too good for this race, so you can't do it. And Caster Semenya was robbed of that because somebody decided that, for no other reason than her body was too good for the sport that she was competing in.
I think the point I'm always kind of at pains to make in all these discussions is that, yeah, well, I accept it. It is not a straightforward debate, and whatever. It's just the amount of airtime it gets and how kind of small
it's phenomenal.
an issue it is.
It's phenomenal.
In terms of the sport,
and that's not even just sport. That's like, that's in general in life with this thing. How something that affects 0.01% of the population commands such. I mean, you're getting that whenever the leader of the opposition is on a political program, he gets asked about this. You look at this, the things that we have to discuss in this country, the state that this country is in, and whenever the leader of the opposition is on any political program, within the first 3 questions he gets asked about this, and you think it's something that affects 0.01% of society, and it's 0.01% of society that I have a lot of sympathy for. I genuinely do. It must be a terrible position to be in. And also, when they're asking those questions, they're not looking after those people, by the way. There's a reason those questions are being asked.
Yeah, that's just the broader point, isn't it? I mean, this is such a small issue in terms of scale, and it's being brought up by people who want to, well, at the end of the day, whether they were intending to or not, I'm not sure. I don't think Navratilova was actually thinking, I want to demonise trans people. She probably is coming from a place of, I want to protect women's sport, and it's gone kind of miles down the wrong kind of path. It would potentially be a generous defence of her. I'm sure other people online would disagree with that, but it has just become so weird and obsessive.
It's the wording again, though, George, isn't it? I think that's what it comes from. That Navratilova's wording of it, and not this time and the last time. And I know there are other people. And listen, I know there are other people from the LGBT community who've also been the same as Navratilova, and they've you think, I can't believe you guys are coming out like this and speaking like this. If there's anybody you'd think should have more empathy for the situation, it's people who've been through those situations themselves.
Yeah. Well, just a depressing note to end on a depressing podcast, really. Losing James always knocks me out of joint. I just feel so disappointed. So I've got some excellent news to end with, Calvin, that I'm going to throw into any other business. And we didn't write this on the schedule, but I thought everyone on the podcast should know, and I'm sure James would really be very embarrassed to give this long monologue. But James always talks about friends of the pod. Well, James is the pod. He's a core founder. He's a heartfelt host. We really bloody miss him when he's not here. And he's had the most wonderful news of his life for us. You'll remember he teased it at the end of last episode. He said, "Oh, my family don't even know yet." We caught up with him afterwards. Mr. James Gray is engaged. Someone has finally agreed to take him on beyond us, which is absolutely astounding news. And an even smaller section of the population than trans athletes have to deal with James Gray now, hopefully. Just one. So congratulations to James, who is sat here listening. And I'm sure everyone who listens to the pod will join me in wishing you all the best in your married life, assuming you get to the line and aren't jilted or anything. And if you want to leave James a 5-star review to say congratulations, we would very much appreciate that. So, Calvin, do you want to say congratulations and then we can wrap this thing up?
Yeah, but many congratulations. Yeah, I know that James, when he proposed, I think it was on his walk around or down Adrian's wall, and I just wondered whether his other half had basically set him a challenge that if he could do that, then she would agree to marry him, because it felt like a bit of a challenge for him, that. But fair play. No, many congrats.
Yes, we found some happy news to finish on, and there's going to be plenty more happy news. We'll be back next week.